Hi everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for all the love from my first two videos. I really appreciate all the likes, the comments. Thank you for sharing and thank you for all the feedback. One of the things I got a lot of was look at the camera. So I'm going to spend my time today looking at all of you. I have been really encouraged by all the comments regarding the importance of this conversation, and so I'm definitely motivated to keep the conversation going. So please keep tuning back each week to listen to the topics that we're going to be discussing. I'm committing to posting a new video every Saturday, so definitely subscribe so that you can get alerts whenever new videos get posted. Today I'm going to be talking about investing in the stock market because that is a request that I got after the most recent video. I got a lot of questions about that. And so I figured that I would start out from a place where a lot of us get our first exposure, and that is our retirement accounts. That's generally the first exposure that a lot of us have to investing in the stock market, at least in the States. And so I figured that today we'll spend some time talking about that. And basically I like to refer to those as long-term investments because you're investing over a long period of time for your retirement, which depending on your age is a few decades away. In this particular video, we'll be focusing on the kind of accounts that you can use for that type of investment. We will be talking about the nature of those investments, how much you should contribute. Also be talking about things like your employer match and things to pay attention to, and what kind of accounts are the most effective for depending on what place you're at, right? I'm going to stop here and point out that there are also short-term investments, which we will talk about in the future. But definitely, usually investment accounts, long-term investment accounts are tax advantaged, and I'll talk a bit about what that means. But they're definitely usually the first place to get started. In another video, we'll be talking about suggestions about ways that you can allocate your investments. Again, I am not a financial advisor. These are just recommendations that other people have. So a lot of us are familiar with the 401k because that's the most popular investment account out there. There are a bunch of other ones, which I'll be talking about today. But just a funny story before I go ahead. When I finished college and I started graduate school, I was a graduate research assistant, and that meant I was a student, but I was also an employee of the university where I worked because I was doing research for the department, and I was getting paid to do that research. When I was doing my paperwork, when I got started, they asked me if I was interested in contributing to my 401k because since I was a student but also an employee, I got to choose. I wasn't automatically enrolled into the university's retirement investment program. And being that I knew nothing about what an investment account was or why I should be saving for retirement, at that point I was 21, barely 21. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in investing. I'm not interested in a retirement account, and ultimately did not sign up for one. Right, so a few weeks passed or a few months passed, and I was visiting one of my uncles, and I started telling him about this. I was like, oh, do you think that I should have signed up for a 401k? And he said, yes, of course. What kind of question is that? So by this time I went back to school and went to my HR person, and I was like, oh, I want to sign up for a 401k. I made a mistake and I opted out. And she said, no, it's too late for you to sign up, right? And basically told me that the only way in which I could sign up was if I stopped working for the university, got another job, and then came back as a new employee. Then I could sign up for it. I ended up being in that job for 5 years, and those are 5 years of my life that I was not investing in a retirement account. Those are 5 years of growth which I have missed, and those are 5 years that happened to occur during a period when the growth in the stock market was really good, right? So that is money that I've missed out on that I could have had if I had just been a little bit more knowledgeable about why I should be investing and how important it is to start early. And so again, my goal with creating this channel is just to inform people who are in the position where I was, where you start a new job but they're like 401k and you're like, what is that? And maybe you've heard it in passing, but you don't know why you should be investing or how much you should be investing. or when you should start investing. So again, we're going to be covering all of those, and hopefully this ends up being valuable to someone. So a 401k is an investment account that is generally run by your employer. If you work for a large company, there's a very high likelihood that your employer has a 401k program which you can enroll into. And these days, some employers automatically enroll people and you have to opt out if you don't want to participate. But whenever you start a new job, it's very important to ask about the 401k program that your employer has. And it's also really critically important to ask or to find out if your employer has a match. And what that just means is if your employer has a match, they're willing to match up to a certain percentage, however much you contribute into your account. So right now, my current employer matches 3%. And what that means is if I contribute 3% of my salary, they're going to match 3%. They're going to also contribute 3% into my 401k. If I contribute 4%, they'll only match 3%, right? So that's what an employer match is. If you're not contributing up to your employer match, then you're missing out on money, because if I chose to contribute only 2%, my employer would also only match 2%. And the rest of that money that it could have contributed towards my retirement is money that I'm not going to be getting just because I chose not to contribute up to what my employer match is. Some employers match up to 6%. And in the story that I told, my employer at the time was matching up to 10%. So by missing out on contributing anything, I was missing out on the complete match that the employer was giving. And I was also missing out on the growth that the money that I was investing, no matter how small it was, would have been making. And as we go along in this channel, you're going to find out that time is everything. The amount of time that I missed out on is growth that I've completely missed out on. When you think about investing and you think about growth, something that comes to mind is compound interest. Basically, compound interest allows your money to grow exponentially more than if the money was just growing proportionally. So by not starting as early as I could have, I missed out on growth. So if you're in your early 20s and you're starting a new job, but you think, oh, retirement is so far away, I'm not even thinking about that, or I have so much that I want to do with this money, I don't see why I should be cutting my paycheck by this, please reconsider. The money that you're planning now is going to grow a lot more than money that you planned 10 years from now. So if you're in a position to start contributing towards your retirement, definitely take advantage of it. And if your employer has a match, contribute at least up to what your employer is willing to match. Okay, so what if your employer doesn't offer a 401k, right? There are a lot of other alternatives that you can use to save towards retirement. Now, some other traditional accounts would be this is something called a solo 401k. If you're a sole proprietor, let's say you have your own business and you don't have any other employees, you can use a solo 401k to contribute towards your retirement. And in that case, the limits for a solo 401k are even much higher than a 401k, a typical traditional 401k. You also would have something called a 403b if you work for a nonprofit organization. And then if you work for a state or local government, your typical retirement account will be called a 457b. So depending on who your employer is, those are all the alternatives that are out there that you can use. Besides all of these, there's also something called an independent retirement account. And this is a retirement account that anybody who has an earned income can use. It's independent. It's not based on your employer. It doesn't, you can set one up and use it regardless of who your employer is. Whereas a 401k is usually tied to a particular employer. The other thing that comes into play now when you start looking at all these terms and all of the information around this is usually traditional versus Roth. So for a lot of us, your 401k is going to be a traditional account. And what that means simply is that you're using pre-tax money to contribute into your retirement account. Your employer pays you, the government doesn't take any taxes out of it. That pre-tax money goes into your 401k. Whereas a Roth account means that your employer pays you, and and then the money gets taxed, and then money which has already been taxed is what's getting used to fund your retirement account. Now, depending on how you think about this, depending on what place you're at, there are advantages and disadvantages of using whether a traditional or a Roth account, right? But before I go into the various pros and cons, I just wanted to spend some time and point out that both of these accounts, both of these types of investment accounts are tax advantaged. So there are advantages to investing in both of them from a tax perspective compared to a regular brokerage account, which would be a non-tax advantaged account. Now, what do I mean? For a pre-tax investment account, which is a long-term account, which is tax advantaged, like a 401k, 403b, a 457b, or traditional IRA, what happens is you put in money that has not been taxed, that money grows, and then when you're trying to pull the money out, you pay taxes on whatever you're collecting. Now, for a Roth account, you pay taxes on the money now, but then you invest the money and you never pay any taxes on whatever gains come out of it, right? Now, for a typical brokerage account, which is not tax advantage, what would happen is you would take money that has already been taxed, you invest it, and you still have to pay taxes on the gains that you make from your investment. So there are various advantages to investing in your tax advantage accounts. These are your long-term investment accounts, because you don't have to, you have to, the way that you pay taxes in is better than if you were investing in an off-the-mill brokerage account. So those are things to keep in mind. Now, if you come now to think about what are the advantages in investing in a traditional versus a Roth, and let me stop here and point out that you can have a traditional IRA, and you can have a Roth IRA. You can also have a traditional 401k and you can have a Roth 401k. You will mostly see traditional 401k accounts and Roth IRAs. And so I'm going to go through and kind of list the pros and cons from a flexibility perspective, the limits perspective, and then also just the timeline of investing in those accounts. Now, thinking about the limits, 401ks generally have the advantage that you're able to contribute a lot more per year than a typical IRA. So for a 401k, the limit for the year 2020 is $19,500. So you can contribute up to $19,500. That doesn't include any match that your employer is willing to provide. That's just your contribution. But for an IRA, the limit for this year is $6,000. So you can only contribute up to $6,000 in an IRA, whether traditional or Roth IRA. The limit for this year is $6,000. Thinking about it from a flexibility perspective, generally your 401k is determined by your employer. So a lot of employers will just provide a certain amount of options and tell you this is what you can choose from that you can invest in your 401k as long as you're an employee here. So there are limits to what you can do. Whereas if you have an IRA, you can basically go in and pick and choose certain stocks. You say you look at a stock or certain index funds or mutual funds, you can have a lot more control over what you invest in. Whereas for a 401k, you have to pick from what your advisor has chosen to allocate. That's an advantage because employers don't necessarily always pick the best vehicles to put your money in. So if you're a little bit more knowledgeable and you have access to an IRA, you have a lot more flexibility to pick and choose what you think matches your risk tolerance, your lifestyle, your timeline. You can pick and choose and fit those into your IRA, which the 401k does not allow you to do. The other thing that comes to mind when trying to pick a vehicle for where to put your investments, your long-term investments, is generally the timeline, right? I've already established that these are long-term accounts, and our goal here is to invest, to just put the money there, invest it for long periods, for decades, 10, 20, 30 years, depending on where you are in life. But the one advantage that an IRA gives you, a Roth IRA specifically gives you, is the flexibility to take out the money that you have contributed after you contributed it. So for example, if I contribute $5,000 into my Roth IRA today, 5 years from now, I can take out the contributions that I made without paying any penalties on it. Now, I'm not allowed to take out any gains. So for example, if I contribute $5,000, 5 years from now, the money has grown. I've invested it in really good index funds. And 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I have $10,000 in there. I can only take out the $5,000 I put. I'm not able to take out beyond my contributions. I'm not able to take out my gains, but I can take out my contributions. So that flexibility is something that, depending on what your various financial goals are, what your plans are for your life, it might be something that would be attractive to certain people. So finally, the one thing that you want to think about is the taxes. How is money taxed in a 401k? Now, how is money taxed in a traditional account versus a Roth account? Now, for a traditional account, you're putting in pre-tax dollars. For a Roth account, you're putting in money that has already been taxed. What that means is 30 years down the road, when you're trying to take the money out, you only have to pay taxes on in a traditional account, because for a Roth account, you would have already paid the taxes when you were putting the money in. So what that means is, if you think that you're going to be better off, you're going to be in a higher tax bracket in the future when you're retiring, it makes sense for you to invest as much as you can now in Roth accounts, because you're paying the money now when you're at a lower tax bracket versus in the future when you're in a higher tax bracket. Another thing to think about is you don't really know whether or not taxes are going to grow. There are a lot of indications, if you ask people, that we might have to start paying more taxes, considering the fact that things like Social Security is essentially running out. If you listen to the news, at least that's what some people say or some people think. So if you're of that school of thought, then there's a likelihood that taxes are going to increase overall across the board as time goes on. So maybe there is an advantage to paying your taxes now rather than investing pre-tax money and then paying taxes in the future. But if you think that you're in a really high tax bracket now, and when you get to retirement, you won't be working anymore and you won't have as much income, or you don't have as many assets that you would be getting income from, then maybe your tax bracket in the future would be lower. And then it makes sense to put as much into traditional accounts now, so that you're not paying taxes on your high income now, but rather you would pay your taxes in retirement when your income is lower. So it all comes down to a personal decision, but I'm encouraging y'all to go out and do your research and try to figure out what works best for your lifestyle, for your plans, current plans, and for your long-term plans. But whatever you do, as a first step, please today identify what the best investment account is for you as a person and for your family as a whole, and take the first step to create your investment account today. Now, the last thing to think about is are the limits that are associated with these various accounts. The limit for a 401k for the year 2020 is $19,500. The limit for an IRA account, whether Roth or traditional, is $6,000. So you realize that a 401k or a 403b or a 457b, depending on who your employer is, give you a lot more room to invest than an IRA would. So definitely take advantage of that and, make the most of investing into your 401k if you have access to one. So someone then would say, well, how much should I be contributing, right? How much is appropriate? A lot of financial advisors recommend that you contribute 15% at least if you're able to. I think that's a really good place to start. If you're in a place where you're not able to do that upfront, definitely start at your employer match and then try to increase the percentage at least once a year by 1% until you get to that 15%, and then do even more if you're able to. Now, something that I should point out is, don't start out working and then say, oh, I have all these problems and I cannot contribute this amount, and then just be satisfied with that. Because once you get your lifestyle once you get used to getting a certain amount of money on your paycheck from not contributing, you're going to get super comfortable with that amount, and it'll be really hard for you to go back and start to increase your contributions. So try to, as much as possible, maximize your contributions early on and then fit your lifestyle to what is left over once you've already contributed towards retirement. This is something that I cannot emphasize enough because time is everything when you think about compound interest. So if you haven't started yet, please start now. Start now. Time is not on your side. And if you haven't started yet, don't be discouraged, right? There's room to catch up. Definitely go today and set up your first retirement account and then start contributing as much as you can. And then just keep it growing from there. So again, if this video was helpful to you, please like, comment below if you have any videos that you would like, if there are any topics that you would like to see in the future. And if you know anyone that could benefit from some of what we talked about today, please share with them. Share with people that you know are recently starting a new job or just getting into a professional workforce. And please encourage your family and friends to subscribe if you know any people that would benefit from any of this. Thank you again for watching.